Have you ever stared at your home network setup, that maybe trusty old PC you've turned into a server, and just wondered, is there a better way? A more efficient way to run all your different projects? Or maybe you're dreaming of hosting your own stuff, media server, personal cloud, maybe a smart home dashboard, but all the tech choices, the OSs, the virtual environments, it just feels like a massive tangle. Well, today we're diving deep into Proxmox. It's this really powerful open source virtualization platform, basically the backbone for countless self-hosting folks out there. We've spent time digging through online tech communities, reading threads, pulling insights, plus our own research to tackle this fundamental Proxmox puzzle. It's something almost everyone hits. You've got multiple services. Should you use lightweight LXC containers for each one? Or should you put everything into one Docker-powered virtual machine, a VM? Or maybe, I don't know, try some kind of hybrid setup.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to cut through that complexity. We want to unpack the fundamental differences between these options. We'll look at the strengths, the weaknesses, and maybe more importantly, show some practical advice, some clever workarounds from people who've really figured this stuff out in their home labs. The goal is simple. Give you a shortcut, basically, to understanding the Proxmox landscape so you can build a setup that works for you. Fast, flexible, and totally under your control, like your own digital kingdom.
Okay, let's unpack this core dilemma then, because Proxmox, its flexibility is amazing, its superpower, but honestly, it can be its biggest challenge too. We saw this one person, really enthusiastic, just starting out. Their plan seemed logical. One service, one LXC container, like Mealy, the recipe app. Put it in its own LXC. Sounds clean.
Makes sense on the surface.
Yeah, but they hit a snag pretty quick, because LXCs, Linux containers, they're often called system containers, not really application containers, which means they often come with a full OS inside, like Debian or Alpine and its systems, the whole deal. So putting just one app in each felt, well, tedious.
Like building lots of tiny computers just for one program each.
Exactly. Like overkill, like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So faced with that kind of feeling, what's the alternative people actually turn to?
That's a really crucial starting point, and it brings up the big question.
Right.
What are we actually talking about? LXC, Docker, VM. Understanding how they're different is, well, it's key. So first, LXC, Linux containers. Think of them as lightweight, isolated spots that share the main Proxmox system's kernel. Their stateful changes stick around like a normal computer you turn off and on.
Yeah.
They have a full OS environment inside, users, file systems, which means upgrades can be a bit more like managing a regular server OS.
Okay, stateful, shared kernel, lightweight OS. Got it.
Then you've got Docker containers. Now, these are designed differently. They're meant to be stateless. You pull an image, run the app. But the important part is you mount your config files and data from outside the container. So the container itself doesn't hold the state.
Ah, so the data lives separately.
Precisely, which makes upgrades way simpler. Often it's just pulling a new image, restarting the container, and your data is still there, safe and sound.
That sounds appealing. And VMs.
And VMs, virtual machines, yeah, these are the heavyweights. Full-on virtual computers. They can run multiple apps, sure, but they use more resources. Why? Because each VM needs its own complete guest OS, Linux, Windows, whatever, running on top of the Proxmox host OS.
Right, so you've got the host OS, then the VM's OS.
Exactly. It gives you the best isolation, definitely, but it costs more in terms of RAM, CPU, disk space.
Okay, definitions down. So this is where it gets really interesting. That newcomer felt LXCs were overkill, but you said the community overwhelmingly leaned towards one LXC per service.
That's right. It was pretty clear.
Why? What's the big draw despite that initial feeling?
Resource efficiency and flexibility. Simple as that. One user just flat out said, LXCs for apps, better than VMs on resources. You can't argue with that kind of directness.
Especially if you're trying to squeeze performance out of older gear.
Absolutely. And connecting that to the bigger picture, you see why LXCs are so loved in the home lab scene. VMs need that whole separate guest OS for each one virtualizing hardware. It adds up. LXCs, they share the host kernel, lots of system libraries, so they're much lighter, faster to start up, use way less RAM, less CPU, less disk.
It's a huge win.
It's a real jackpot, especially, like you said, for folks running older kit.
Yeah.
Maybe a 10-year-old PC or retired server. Performance and cost savings are critical there. We even saw someone boasting their self-hosted Nextcloud running in an LXC was actually outperforming Google Docs for responsiveness.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and their WordPress site was apparently rivaling AWS hosting speeds. That's the kind of win, that makes getting your hands dirty with Proxmox feel so rewarding. Enterprise feel on a shoestring budget.
That is the dream. Enterprise power, minimal cost.
But, okay, for someone new, setting up dozens of these, even lightweight ones, still feels like a bit of a climb initially. Are there shortcuts or common mistakes people make trying to get that set up?
That's fair. It can seem daunting. And yeah, that's where the community wisdom is gold. The consensus seems to be start simple. Use a lightweight base image. Debian or Alpine are the favorites. We saw one person mention they run like 50-50 Debian Alpine LXCs for dozens of containers, each one doing just one job
Okay.
and their method. Install the app directly inside the LXC. They specifically try to avoid Docker unless it's, absolutely needed for some super tricky app or something they really don't want to build from source.
So like spin up an Alpine LXC, run the Mealy setup script inside it, configure it as a service.
Exactly that. Keep it lean, gives you full control over that specific app's environment. Great for debugging or tuning.
And a common pitfall. Oh yeah. Forgetting to update the OS inside the LXC. It's easy to forget it's separate from the main Proxmox host. You got to treat each LXC like its own mini server. Needs its app updated and an app upgrade or whatever the Alpine equivalent is.
Right, right. Okay, so that helps. But making the whole process less intimidating, especially for beginners, the community pointed towards helper scripts.
Yeah.
Like from community scripts for Proxmox on GitHub, sounds like a lifesaver.
Oh, they absolutely are. The real insight isn't just automation. It's that they, demystify the whole setup. They turn what could be hours of fighting dependencies and config files into literally minutes.
Hi.
Yeah, one of the maintainers put it simply, it's basically a lot of install scripts for self-hostable apps. They just wrap up all the complexity.
Oh.
Installing Nextcloud or Home Assistant becomes almost a single command.
Like having an expert buddy helping out.
Exactly. Doing the boring bits for you, making sure it's a clean, optimized install. That's the community really helping lower the barrier for everyone.
Okay, so LXCs are popular, efficient, and scripts make them easier. But not everyone's fully on board with the one LXC per app thing. Some folks really prefer Docker, right, for its simplicity, especially running lots of apps together.
Definitely. We saw that too. One user described their setup, just a single VM running a really lightweight Debian install, then Docker inside that VM, and Docker manages all their containers like the R suite, Sonar, Radar, those media tools.
What's the appeal there? Just the Docker workflow?
Partly that, and Docker's stateless design. Upgrades are often just Docker pull and restart. Super easy.
Ah, they upgrade simplicity again.
Yeah, and they mount their app data to a folder on the VM itself, so configs, databases, they all stick around even if a container has issues.
The overhead, that's the catch, isn't it? Running Docker inside a VM.
It is the potential catch, that comment about stacking OS on top of OS. That's the worry.
Proxmox host OS, then the VM's guest OS, then Docker containers. That's 3 layers.
Right, for just one app. Multiply that by, say, 10 or 20 apps, and you could be looking at noticeable resource use and more complexity managing all those layers.
So is that overhead always a killer, or is there a way around it?
Well, that's where careful choices matter. It can create bloat, yes. But some users argue that if you're really disciplined about it, use an extremely lightweight guest OS for that Docker VM, maybe a headless Debian server, no desktop fluff.
Keep the VM lean.
Exactly. Then the overhead might become, as one user put it, negligible for their specific setup and hardware. And remember the point about setup time. Spinning up a new container takes time configuring everything. Docker shines there, especially for apps with really involved setups. Using Docker Compose makes managing those complex stacks much easier than setting up each piece individually in LXCs.
So it's a trade-off, ease of management for complex stacks versus potential resource overhead.
It is. It's not a universal solution, more choice based on priorities, often chosen for that Docker Compose convenience.
Okay, so if you like Docker's simplicity, but you are worried about VM overhead, is there a middle ground, something that balances LXC lightness with Docker ease?
There is. And it's becoming quite popular. Running Docker directly inside an LXC.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, it's a clever way to kind of get the best of both worlds. You create one LXC, install Docker inside that, and then manage all your Docker containers from within that single LXC.
So you lose the VM layer.
Exactly. You get the near-native performance of the LXC because it shares the host kernel, but you still get the portability and the easy management of Docker for your application.
That cuts down the OS-on-OS bloat significantly.
Right. It's a hybrid approach that seems to hit a sweet spot for many. Reduces overhead, but keeps the Docker ecosystem advantages.
This hybrid approach, it does sound like a really compelling compromise for people torn between the two. LXC efficiency, Docker ease of use. But what are the practical implications? Any downsides to this hybrid setup?
Good question, because, yeah, every choice has trade-offs. We heard from someone who actually went the other way. They migrated from a Docker VM to individual LXCs.
Why'd they do that?
They wanted more granular control. Like if one app went haywire, they could just isolate and reboot that single LXC without touching anything else. More isolation between services.
Makes sense.
But they admitted there was a drawback. Docker's way of mounting data externally. It made recovery super easy if a container messed up or needed rebuilding.
Ah, right, because the data was separate.
Exactly. With individual LXCs, you're managing a whole mini-system. Backups and restores need a bit more thought, often using Proxmox's own tools. It's not harder, just different. You're backing up the whole container state, usually.
So more control with individual LXCs, but maybe slightly easier data recovery with Docker's external mounts.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Though Proxmox backups are very good. It's about what workflow you prefer. And for certain things, like maybe a bunch of services that talk to each other a lot and you'd manage with Docker Compose, putting them all in one Docker-enabled LXC can simplify that internal networking compared to linking separate LXCs.
Okay, so different setups, different backup considerations, which brings us to the big one, keeping your data safe. That's critical. What's the consensus there?
Absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
And the community was loud and clear.
Yeah.
Use Proxmox built-in backup tools. They're really robust.
Like Proxmox Backup Server.
PBS. Exactly. PBS is a standout. One user runs it as its own VM, and they pass through an entire physical disk just for backup storage.
Dedicated backup storage. Nice.
Yeah, and they said, if something happens to the host, I can rebuild, pass the same disk to PBS, and restore everything. That's pretty solid disaster recovery right there.
That offers peace of mind.
Yeah.
Any other approaches?
Well, another person mentioned for simpler things, they just mount storage from the Proxmox host directly into specific LXCs. Avoids VMs entirely for those apps. Simplifies their backups because they can just back up the host directory.
Ah, so you can tailor the backup strategy too.
Totally. Full VMLXC backups via PBS, simple data backups via mounted host folders. That flexibility is really a Proxmox hallmark. You pick what fits your needs and risk level.
Okay, services running, backups sorted, next puzzle, getting to them from outside your house, right? Remote access. We saw a really common question about Tailscale. You know, that super easy VPN. How do you use it to access apps in LXCs without installing Tailscale on every single container? Because that sounds like a massive pain.
It really does. And the community's answer here was honestly a bit of a breakthrough for many. It was simple but powerful. Once you have access to your network, you have access to all of them. Meaning you set up Tailscale on just one device on your Proxmox network. Could be a dedicated LXC, could be that Docker LXC we talked about, even a small VM.
Okay, one Tailscale instance.
Right. Then on that one instance, you enable IP forwarding. This lets it act like a gateway or router.
Ah, like a subnet router in Tailscale terms.
Exactly. You advertise the route to your internal LXC network. Make sure your LXCs have static IPs, by the way. Then from your Tailscale clients anywhere in the world, you can just access the internal IPs of your LXCs directly.
Through that one gateway LXC.
Precisely. Configure your firewall rules correctly, obviously, but yeah. You reach all your apps without needing Tailscale installed on every single one.
That is a game changer. Keeps the containers clean, simplifies management massively.
Totally. Manage your whole Homelab from anywhere, no extra clutter. Just make sure, quick tip here, to check firewall rules on the Proxmox host and inside that Tailscale gateway LXC, just to ensure traffic flows smoothly but securely.
Got it. Okay, we've touched on them a few times, but let's circle back to those community scripts. They kept coming up, and it sounds like for good reason, like a cheat code for Proxmox.
Pretty much. They offer installers for dozens and dozens of popular self-hosted apps. Takes all the guesswork out of that initial setup phase, which is huge for getting started quickly.
But it's more than just installers, right?
Yeah. What's really invaluable is they often include post-install guides, too. For Debian, for Ubuntu, covering extra steps, security tweaks, other configurations you might need.
Things you might forget otherwise.
Exactly. A maintainer pointed out, these guides are linked during installation, so you're not left scratching your head about what to do next to secure it properly. Whether you're setting up a new LXC, troubleshooting, these community resources are just fantastic.
So community scripts are amazing, but what about like going beyond that? Establish best practices, maybe more advanced stuff for bigger setups.
Excellent point. Once you're comfortable with the basics, there are definitely ways to level up your Proxmox game.
Like what are those next level things?
Well, first off, security. Proxmox's own documentation and lots of experienced users strongly recommend running LXCs as unprivileged.
Unprivileged, meaning?
It means the root user inside the LXC has no actual root privileges on the Proxmox host itself. So even if that container gets compromised somehow, the attacker is sandboxed. They can't easily break out and mess with the host system or other containers. It's a critical security layer.
Okay, unprivileged LXCs. Good tip. What else?
Automation. If you start managing lots of LXCs or VMs, doing it manually gets old fast.
Hmm.
Tools like Ansible or Terraform are incredibly powerful here.
Infrastructure as code.
Exactly. You define your entire setup, LXCs, VMs, network settings, maybe even Docker containers within them in configuration files. Then these tools build it all automatically, consistently, repeatably.
Spin up a whole new set of services with one command. Nice.
It's incredibly efficient as you scale. And speaking of scaling and robustness, data safety again. Beyond PBS, think about leveraging ZFS if you're using it. ZFS snapshots let you instantly capture the state of your storage. Something goes wrong during an upgrade. Roll back in seconds.
Instant recovery, almost.
Pretty much. And combine that with offsite backups. Integrating Proxmox backup server or even just your data backups with cloud storage like Backblaze B2 gives you that extra protection against, fire, flood, or just catastrophic hardware failure at home.
Right, the 3-2-1 backup rule.
You got it. These are things that take a home lab from just being a hobby project to a really robust, reliable personal server setup.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you, the listener, the Homelab builder?
I think the real thrill of Proxmox is just that the endless possibilities, the freedom, whether you end up going with one LXC per app for that lean efficiency, or you prefer Docker in a VM for simplicity, or you try that hybrid LXC Docker approach. The main thing is to just experiment. Try things out, iterate, find what works best for you, your hardware, your comfort level.
Absolutely. There really isn't one single right answer here.
No, it's about what empowers you. And connecting that to the bigger picture again. It's that collective community wisdom combined with great tools like the community scripts and clever tricks like that Tailscale routing. That's what lets you innovate. It lets you build something powerful but still manageable. And the ultimate prize, it's that self-hosted ecosystem that's fast, flexible, reliable, and completely, truly under your control. That's a liberating feeling in today's world. Puts you back in charge.
Totally. And maybe here's a final thought to chew on as you go build your digital domain. While you're figuring out LXCs versus Docker or mastering backups, what unexpected skills, what creative solutions might you discover about yourself? Beyond just the tech stuff, what happens when you become the master of your own digital destiny? Keep exploring, keep building, and keep learning.